Drive-in theaters were once the beating heart of American pop culture, an open-air carnival of sound, spectacle, and community. But sometimes the movies shown were so intense, so outrageous, that they didn't just thrill audiences, they drew the attention of the police. Can you imagine being at a movie so wild that officers had to intervene? Tonight, we're uncovering the unforgettable stories of 15 drive-in screenings that pushed boundaries and made history. Buckle up. This ride gets unpredictable. The Tingler, 1959. Imagine sitting in your car at a drive-in, expecting a routine late-night scare, when suddenly your seat vibrates as if something alive is crawling through your back. That was the genius or madness of William Castle's The Tingler. Known as a master of theatrical gimmicks, Castle devised a system he called Percepto, where buzzers were wired into certain seats. When the monster appeared on screen, the devices buzzed, jolting viewers at just the right moment. At indoor theaters, the stunt caused mayhem. But at drive-ins, it was even more chaotic. People screamed so loudly that motorists on nearby highways pulled over, assuming something terrible had happened. In some towns, neighbors living near outdoor theaters called emergency lines, reporting that they heard hundreds of people crying out for help. Local officers rushed in, only to find moviegoers laughing, shrieking, and spilling sodas all over themselves. What made the Tingler such a legendary case wasn't just the gimmick, it was the fact that it blurred the line between illusion and reality. Patrons didn't know if they were supposed to laugh, panic, or run. Castle had turned a drive-in movie into an event where the audience itself became part of the show. For police, it was a headache. For cinema history, it was a masterstroke. And to this day, The Tingler is remembered as the movie that electrified not just audiences, but entire communities. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. When this independent revenge drama hit drive-ins in the late 70s, it unleashed a storm of controversy. Advertised with sensational taglines, it promised an experience unlike anything audiences had seen before. And audiences weren't prepared. Some stayed glued to their seats, others stormed out angrily, and in a few towns, community groups gathered outside theaters demanding the screenings be stopped. At one notorious drive-in showing, arguments between moviegoers and protesters escalated into shoving matches. Tempers flared, and suddenly the movie became secondary to the real-life drama unfolding in the parking lot. Calls were made to local authorities, and police arrived to calm the situation, ensuring cars could safely leave the theater without the scuffle growing larger. For theater owners, the film presented a dilemma. It sold tickets and packed the lots, but it also attracted the kind of attention that could risk business licenses. Some managers even hired off-duty officers to monitor entrances in case things got heated. What's most fascinating is how this one film became a cultural touchstone in debates about censorship, freedom of expression, and community standards. Whether you thought it was an important piece of independent cinema or an over-the-top exploitation piece, one fact was undeniable. It transformed a night at the drive-in into a powder keg. And when the police showed up, it only cemented the legend. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. When Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange hit American drive-ins in the early 70s, it sparked a cultural firestorm. Adapted from Anthony Burgess's dystopian novel, the film's blend of futuristic violence, dark satire, and provocative imagery was unlike anything audiences had seen under the stars. At drive-ins, it wasn't just a screening. It was a flashpoint. Young fans showed up dressed like the film's characters, blasting music and mimicking scenes in the parking lots. For some, it was exhilarating. For others, it was threatening. In several towns, fights broke out between groups of teens, and police were called to break up clashes that blurred the line between performance and disturbance. Complaints also rolled in from nearby neighborhoods, where families objected to the movie's controversial themes echoing into the night air. Officers often found themselves caught between outraged protesters demanding the movie be shut down and curious crowds determined to see what the fuss was about. Theater owners leaned into the chaos, advertising the movie as the film too shocking for ordinary theaters. And in truth, the police presence only heightened its appeal, turning a night at the drive-in into something dangerous, rebellious, and unforgettable. For cinema history, A Clockwork Orange wasn't just a movie. It was an event that showed how art could stir outrage, inspire devotion, and literally summon law enforcement to the gates of the drive-in. Pink Flamingos, 1972. John Waters' Pink Flamingos wasn't designed for polite applause. It was designed to shock, provoke, and stir audiences into reaction. At traditional midnight screenings, fans turned viewings into events, cheering, laughing, and shouting back at the screen. But at drive-ins, the effect was magnified tenfold. With the movie's outrageous tone blasting into the open night, cars full of young fans gathered not just to watch, but to make noise, honk horns, and turn screenings into full-blown parties. This didn't sit well with everyone. Residents near the theaters complained of sleepless nights, claiming the movie's indecent nature wasn't appropriate for public spaces where children might overhear. In several towns, police officers were dispatched to drive-ins mid-showing to check if the film violated decency laws. While they rarely shut the movie down, their presence was enough to intimidate some patrons and ignite heated debates about what should or shouldn't be shown in public. Theaters that booked Pink Flamingos often leaned into the controversy. The police arriving at a screening didn't scare off fans. It made the experience feel even more rebellious. For young audiences, it became a badge of honor to say they had attended a Pink Flamingos drive-in screening where officers appeared. In the end, Waters' film wasn't just cinema, it was cultural rebellion. And the fact that it summoned the police in more than one community proved how effective it was at rattling the establishment. Blood Feast, 1963. Before mainstream horror pushed boundaries, there was Blood Feast, a shocking, low-budget film that promised audiences something they had never seen before. Herschel Gordon Lewis, often called the godfather of gore, made a movie so graphic for its time that it caused near hysteria at drive-ins. Imagine a Friday night in 1963. Families packed into cars expecting a campy horror flick. Instead, they got a relentless barrage of shocking imagery. Patrons screamed, teenagers shrieked from the back seats, and cars peeled out of the lots before the movie even ended. The ruckus carried into nearby neighborhoods, with residents calling the police convinced that something violent was actually happening at the theater. In one famous instance, officers stormed into a drive-in expecting to break up a fight, only to find the chaos coming entirely from the screen. Audiences weren't fighting. They were panicking at the movie itself. For many small-town police forces, it was their first brush with the power of cinema to genuinely rattle a community. Blood Feast may not have had a big budget, but it sparked a legacy. It proved that independent films could shake audiences in ways Hollywood hadn't dared. And in doing so, it wrote itself into drive-in legend, not just as a movie, but as an event that could summon flashing lights and sirens before the credits rolled. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. From the opening narration to the final image of a figure spinning wildly in the dawn light, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre unsettled audiences in a way few films ever had. Shot on a shoestring budget, its grainy documentary-like style made it feel too real. And at drive-ins, that realism created problems that went far beyond the screen. Audiences weren't just startled, they were unnerved to the point of chaos. Some teenagers played pranks, jumping out of cars to scare friends mid-scene. Others honked horns in panic or drove recklessly through parking rows. Rumors spread that the movie was based on a true story, adding fuel to the frenzy. Police were repeatedly called to restore order when fights broke out between patrons who thought the scares had gone too far. In certain towns, law enforcement even stationed officers outside theaters to monitor the crowds. Ironically, the movie's promoters leaned into this, marketing it as so terrifying police had to be called. It wasn't just hype. Newspaper clippings confirmed disturbances across the country. The movie's impact was undeniable. It didn't just terrify, it created a national conversation about how horror could push boundaries and still draw massive crowds. For drive-in culture, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre became more than a movie. It was a social event that literally required police backup. Caligula, 1979. When Caligula arrived at American drive-ins, it was unlike anything people had ever seen. Lavish sets, sweeping Roman costumes, and a reputation for scandal made it both irresistible and notorious. But what really set it apart wasn't just its historical drama, it was the uproar it caused. Crowds flocked to drive-ins out of curiosity, but not everyone approved. Religious groups and local civic organizations often staged protests at the entrances. Cars were blocked from entering, and shouting matches between supporters and protesters sometimes got so heated that police were called to keep traffic flowing. In some small towns, officers even had to stand by for the entire screening to prevent disturbances. For many communities, the film represented a clash between old values and the changing entertainment landscape of the late 1970s. The idea of such a provocative epic being shown publicly outdoors, where passing families might glimpse the screen, was too much for some. But here's the twist. The controversy made the movie even more popular. Theater managers who endured police visits often reported sold-out lots. People wanted to see the film everyone was talking about, the one that had drawn flashing lights to the drive-in gates. The Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1975. Few films have ever inspired the kind of audience devotion that the Rocky Horror Picture Show did. What began as a quirky musical became a full-fledged cultural ritual, with fans showing up in costumes, singing along, and tossing props into the air. Drive-ins amplified this experience in spectacular ways. Imagine dozens of cars packed with fans, each vehicle its own mini-party. People spilled out of cars to dance, shout at the screen, and set off confetti cannons. At some screenings, fireworks and sparklers lit up the night sky, turning the movie into a carnival. For neighbors living nearby, it sounded like a festival that never ended. Complaints about noise and rowdy behavior poured in, and police were called to several theaters to manage the enthusiastic crowds. Yet the police presence didn't dampen the energy. It only added to the sense of rebellion. Fans bragged about being part of a screening so wild, it needed law enforcement. For drive-in owners, it was a mixed blessing. The film kept bringing in audiences week after week, but it also meant constantly walking a fine line between celebration and chaos. In hindsight, the Rocky Horror Picture Show wasn't just a movie. At drive-ins, it became a living, breathing event, one where the audience made as much history as the film itself. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. By 1980, horror had already shocked audiences in countless ways. But Cannibal Holocaust pushed boundaries so far that even seasoned drive-in regulars weren't sure what they were watching. Its documentary-style presentation led some to believe they were seeing real events captured on film. The reaction? Pure uproar. At certain drive-ins, police were called almost immediately. Some residents insisted the film was too graphic for public display, especially on outdoor screens visible from passing roads. Authorities arrived to investigate, and in rare cases, reels of the movie were even confiscated. For small-town theaters, just booking Cannibal Holocaust felt like inviting controversy straight to their gates. The film sparked larger debates about censorship, artistic freedom, and community responsibility. Was it art pushing the limits, or simply too much for the general public? Those arguments often played out with police officers standing by, ensuring screenings didn't devolve into protests or brawls. For drive-in culture, Cannibal Holocaust is remembered less as a piece of cinema and more as a lightning rod. It showed just how far audiences could be tested before the authorities stepped in, and how sometimes curiosity and outrage became inseparable parts of the movie-going experience. Last House on the Left, 1972. When Wes Craven's Last House on the Left arrived at drive-ins, it immediately drew a reputation for being too raw, too relentless, and too much for average audiences. Teens dared each other to sit through it, while parents protested outside theater gates. The tension around this film was so intense that police were frequently called to manage crowds. In some cases, officers were summoned after fights broke out between protesters and excited young viewers. In others, residents living near drive-ins complained about the disturbing sounds echoing from outdoor speakers. Convinced something real was happening, police often arrived expecting a fight, only to find audiences shaken by what they had just witnessed on screen. Theaters tried to market the controversy, running ads warning audiences to keep telling yourself it's only a movie. But those warnings didn't stop the police visits. In fact, the disturbances often made the movie more appealing. Young people wanted to see the film that parents hated, and the police presence only added to its reputation. Ultimately, Last House on the Left wasn't just a film, it was a cultural flashpoint. It pushed audiences into heated debates about what was acceptable at the drive-in, and for many, it marked the moment when the line between entertainment and chaos nearly disappeared. Mad Max, 1979. When George Miller's Mad Max first rolled onto American drive-in screens, it didn't just play like a movie. It roared like a thunderstorm. The post-apocalyptic tale of fast cars, leather-clad gangs, and brutal road battles tapped directly into the drive-in culture of youth rebellion. But with that energy came problems. Fans didn't just watch the movie, they imitated it. After showings, cars sped out of lots like drag racers, engines revving, tires squealing, and drivers weaving dangerously onto nearby highways. In several towns, police were dispatched not because of the film itself, but because the chaos outside turned into a rolling traffic hazard. Neighbors reported sleepless nights filled with roaring engines and honking horns as teenagers tried to live out the movie's anarchic spirit. Officers often had to set up patrols near theaters on weekends just to keep the peace. Ironically, this only added to Mad Max's mystique. Posters boasting about its raw intensity suddenly had flashing lights and sirens backing them up. For young audiences, being at a screening where cops appeared felt like part of the rebellion the movie celebrated. For drive-in history, Mad Max wasn't just a film, it was a call to unleash chaos. And in 1979, plenty of audiences answered that call. so much so that the police had to chase the movie long after the credits ended. Faster, Pussycat. Kill, Kill. 1965. Russ Meyer's campy action film was tailor-made for the drive-in scene. Fast cars, larger-than-life characters, and a sense of rebellious energy kept teenagers buzzing. But for conservative towns in the 1960s, Faster, Pussycat, Kill, Kill was seen as downright scandalous. At drive-ins, its brash energy sparked rowdy reactions. Cars full of fans honked, cheered, and even raced out of the lots after showings imitating the movie's wild car chases. Neighbors who overheard the noise complained, and in multiple communities, police were dispatched to check whether the screenings were appropriate for public view. Some officers simply monitored the crowds, while others actually questioned theater managers about the content on the screen. The irony? These confrontations only gave the film more power. Fans who attended screenings where officers showed up bragged about being part of forbidden cinema. Meyer himself later admitted that controversy often sold more tickets than positive reviews ever could. Today, Faster, Pussycat, Kill, Kill is regarded as a cult classic. But at the time, it was a lightning rod. An underground sensation that could make a quiet town's police department suddenly very busy on a Friday night. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. When George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead crept onto drive-in screens, audiences had no idea what was coming. It wasn't just another monster flick. It was a bleak, unrelenting nightmare that ended with one of the most shocking conclusions of the decade. At drive-ins, the effect was devastating. Kids cried in back seats, adults shouted at the screen, and long silences were broken only by car horns blaring in frustration or disbelief. Neighbors heard the noise, and not knowing it was just a movie, called local authorities. Police officers arrived expecting a riot, only to find stunned crowds glued to the screen. The movie was groundbreaking for another reason. It was one of the first mainstream horror films to feature an African-American lead, a bold move in 1968. This sparked heated conversations outside the theater, sometimes requiring officers to calm heated debates in the parking lots. Night of the Living Dead showed how a low-budget film could shake audiences to their core. The fact that it summoned police attention wasn't just about rowdy fans, it was proof that Romero had changed horror forever. Flesh Gordon, 1974. Intended as a cheeky parody of old science fiction adventures, Flesh Gordon quickly became infamous at the drive-ins. Its mix of slapstick humor, campy special effects, and deliberately outrageous scenarios drew curious crowds. But the problem wasn't inside the theater, it was outside. Rowdy fans turned screenings into loud all-night parties. Cars blasted music, people shouted jokes louder than the film's speakers, and more than one drive-in reported mini parades of costumed fans clogging the entrances. Complaints poured in from neighbors about sleepless nights and blocked roads. Before long, police were being dispatched to disperse the noise and restore order. For fans, the police visits only made the movie feel more rebellious, like being part of a secret club that the town wanted to shut down. The more the authorities tried to monitor it, the more young audiences flocked to see it. Though it may not have been high art, Flesh Gordon became a textbook case of how parody could spark as much trouble as a serious film. For drive-in culture, it's remembered less for what happened on screen than for the carnival atmosphere it created in the lots. Eraserhead, 1977. David Lynch's surreal debut is one of the strangest films ever made, and at drive-ins it bewildered audiences like nothing before. Black and white, slow-moving, and filled with disturbing dream imagery, Eraserhead didn't provoke the usual screams. It provoked confusion, anger, and even shouting matches between moviegoers. Some audiences laughed nervously, others shouted insults at the screen, and many simply drove away mid-show. The noise of honking cars and frustrated viewers led to calls from nearby residents. Police were dispatched to check on the disturbance, only to discover that the chaos came from bewildered patrons, not an actual emergency. The movie wasn't designed to entertain in a traditional sense. It was designed to unsettle, and at drive-ins, it did so almost too well. For police, the challenge was keeping the peace when audiences couldn't decide whether to stay silent, scream, or start arguments in the lot. In the years since, Eraserhead has become a cult masterpiece, studied in film schools and praised for its originality. But in its early days, it was simply that strange movie that got the cops called. And for those who witnessed it live at a drive-in, the memory remains unforgettable. Drive-ins were never just about watching movies. They were about the wild, unpredictable energy that came with them. These 15 films proved that cinema could spill beyond the screen, rattling audiences so much that even the police had to join the story. Which of these legendary nights would you have braved? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you enjoyed the ride, and don't forget to subscribe because the next unforgettable screening may surprise you.